We're on Masechta Shabbos, Kuf Mem Ches, Amar Aleph. Halacha machziras hashever. The halacha, even though the Mishnah said we don't fix a broken bone, the Gemara says the halacha is we do fix it. Rabbi Rachana ikla pumpadisa. Rabbi Rachana came to Pumpadisa. All the Pirkei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was giving the shir, but Rabbi Rachana did not attend. Shadri la ada daila. So Rabbi Yehuda wanted Rabbi Rachana to come to a shir. He told his servant, Amalei Zil Grabe, go take his coat. That way, he'll have to come to the shir to get his coat back. Ozil Garbe, they took his coat. Asa, so Rabbi Rachana came to the shir. Ashkei Kadorish. He heard Rabbi Yehuda Darshan, Ein Machziras Hashever, that we don't fix the broken bone. Amalei, what do you mean? Hachi Amrav Chana Bagdasam or Shmuel. In the name of Shmuel, Allah Machziras Hashever. Amr Leha Chanadi Don Bashmuel Didon. Rabbi Yehuda lived in Bavel. He said Shmuel is ours, and Chana is ours. You, Rabbi Rachana, came from Eretz Yisrael, but I, Lo Shmieli, V'la B'dinei Gravticha. So you see, you taught us something new. It was a good thing that I took your coat, that you came to the shir, so you could set us straight. The halacha is you're allowed to set a broken bone on Shabbos. Misha nifraka yado, if you had a dislocated hand or foot. So the Mishnah said you could wash your hands normally, but you couldn't soak it. Rav Avia Yosef came to Rav Yosef. Rav Avia was learning from Rav Yosef. Shani le yade, he had a dislocated hand. So then he turned his hand in the water and he said, "Is this permitted?" Hachamai. Rav Yosef said, "Asr." And he did it another way. Hachamai. Amalei Asr. Meanwhile, his hand got healed. So Rav Yosef wanted to know, what were you questioning? That's not. It says, it's very clear from our Mishnah. If you have a dislocated hand or foot, don't soak it in cold water. So, Roel Shilas. Yeah, because didn't say the Mishnah ein Machziras Hashever. The Mishnah also said you can't correct a broken bone. Yet the Gemara brings a statement on Rav Chana Bagdasam Shmuel halacha Machziras Hashever. So I thought maybe here it's also would be overturned. Amalei Rav Yosef says no. What? You think every halacha is learned with like one character? No. There was a learning in the name of Shmuel that overturned the Mishnah. Where there's an itmar, there's an itmar. Here there's no itmar, so it remains prohibited. So if the halacha is if the bone is completely dislocated from the socket, you're allowed to return it because it's a sakana. If it's not a full dislocation, it's not a risk to the limb, you just wash it. You can't, because the dislocated limb can, if it's out of the socket, can lead to lack of blood supply. It could be a sakana nefashos. Hadin Allah, chavis, hadin chavis. New perek Shlosha ve'esrim, 23rd perek Shoel. You can go to your neighbor on Shabbos and say, I need a cup of sugar. The Mishnah says it's a jug of wine or a jug of oil. You're not allowed to do transactions on Shabbos. So you wouldn't be allowed to do a loan. But this is like when you borrow a cup of sugar, you're going to get the same cup of sugar back. Or let's say I need a wine pitcher for my neighbor. So I give him my wine pitcher. He gives it back to me. It's not considered a long period of time. It's usually going to be a short-term thing. And therefore, you won't come to write it down. Now, a loan of money is usually for a minimum of 30 days. There, because it's a little more long-term, people will write it down. So the Mishnah is You have to use the word hishilani. Loan it to me like shoel. But you can't say halveni, loan it to me. Because that would imply a longer period of time. The guy might come to write it down. Housewife can borrow from her neighbor a loaf of bread. You're going to pay it back. You're going to give her a loaf of bread back. Now, imeno mamino, if you don't trust him, maniach taliso, so you can leave your coat there as a mashkon. It's still not a problem because it's still going to be short term. And osimo cheshbon lachar Shabbos, you come after Shabbos to do cheshbon because you can't do cheshbon now. When Erev Pesach fell on Shabbos, and you need to go buy a shebsel, a little sheep for the Korban Pesach. Let's say you hadn't bought it yet. So meniach taliso etzlo, you can leave your garment with the seller. The noitas basically you take your Korban Pesach. What's about cheshbon? After Yontif, you come and pay him back. What's the difference? They both refer to loans. Like I explained, shilani is not long term. It's for less than 30 days. You're not going to write it down. So part of the problem, besides doing business, is gzeira. Maybe you're going to be koiser. Halveni osi lemichta, but if you use the word halveni, which implies a loan, and it's going to be 30 days or more, they'll write it down. Now, if you go to your neighbor on Wednesday, and you want to also borrow a cup of sugar, and you should use the terminology hishilani, but you made a mistake and you said hilvani. V'lo kapid alai. We don't care about the language, but since it's permitted to write, he'll probably write it. So even if you use Ishilani, he might come to write it. On Wednesday, whether you say Ilvani, whether you say Shilani, we're not makpid, and he's not going to write it, or he writes it, that's okay. But b'Shabbos, given the Shilani, it's only Hishilani is language that the Chachamim allowed you to use on Shabbos. So based on that alone, that'll be a mnemonic for him. That'll be a way for remember that he's doing something differently. He's using different phraseology. He's not going to come to write it down. Now, on Yontif, when you're allowed to do certain work, but you're still supposed to change the way you do it from the way you normally do it during the week. So he asked the question, Hani Nashi, these women that go down to the river, the Mayan Chatzbayu Maya, that fill a bucket of water and come back to their house with it, my time alone Shanina, how come they don't change what they normally do during the week? Mar says Mishum Deloy Efsham, because there was no way for them to change. Because Heichila Avdi, what would they do? The Mayan Mechatzva Rabba. Let's say normally they would use a big bucket, and now to do a shinui, they're going to use a smaller bucket. She's going to have to make many trips, and that increases the distance that she has to walk. Well, that's not helping. Normally, the Mayan Bechatzva Zuta Limila Bechatzva Rabba, she normally uses a small bucket. Now you tell her make a shinui, use a bigger bucket, come off shima b'masu. So she's lifting a heavier item. Nifris Sudra, put a handkerchief over it as a shinui. It'll get wet. You'll squeeze it out. Cover it with a
lid.
What was that?
With a lid, L-I-D.
Yeah, like the top of the bucket to cover it. So they usually would use a rope and to keep it there. And zimnin de mifsik, you might break the rope. You come to tie it. So hilkach lo efshar. So there was no way to do a shinui that made it better for us. So therefore, they can carry it without a shinui. Amalei Rabba Bar Chanal Abayit Tnan lo mesapkin v'lo metapchin. You don't beat your chest. You don't clap. V'lo meragdim b'yontif an yontif. They used to do this in mourning. These actions. So there's a love not to do it. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Ein meragdim, we don't dance. Ve'en mochachayik, we don't clap. O mashmim shar, or make other noises. I'm a sign liriku to help dance. Ulashir b'Shabbos v'yont gzeira shema yitakin kli shir. It's a gzeira because you'll use a musical instrument. However, b'derech shinui mutter. So the Rambam says if you clap this way, it's permitted. Says the Shulchan Aruch, "Banenu she'osim zos." Today, if you see people doing it, benatam shemutav shiu shoygigim. It's still not permitted, but we don't come out publicly and say don't do it because we don't want people to be amazed. Rather, they should be shoygigim. The whole reason is that you're going to have to fix that. You might come to fix a musical instrument. Today, the average person doesn't know how to do that. Called Eile Mutarim. The Ramah, quoting Tosfos, says you're allowed to do it. So that's why you see, at least in Ashkenazi shuls, people clap on Shabbos because of this Ramah. Yeah. Yes.
In Simchas Torah, people dance.
I just read the Ramah, that the whole point of the Gzeira of both clapping and dancing is because you're going to make a clay shear. Clay shear. By the way, my mother, who grew up in Frankfurt, who davened in the Breuer Shul there, reports to when Joey Ryan was alive, he had a siddur that was called Minhag Frankfurt. And I remember looking, and my mother always said that on Simchas Torah there was no dancing. And there was no hakafis like we do. Just after laning, the president of the shul, wearing top hats, they would take a Sefer Torah and they would do like when we do Su'u Sha'arim or Sheichem, they would say Sisu v'simcha b'simchas Torah. They would make a little rekud on the bima, and that's it. That was Minhag Frankfurt. Now, I'm not.
Yeah, one thing's for sure: the Yekkers were not happy people.
What was that?
The Yekkers are not happy people.
Right. So you see clearly the Ramah says in our Bismanenu, according to Tosfos, we can do all of this because the whole Gzeira is to fix a musical instrument, and today most people can't fix a musical instrument, so the Gzeira doesn't hold. But you see by the Sfardim, according to Shulchan Aruch, he's more machmir. Weiter. So in fact, the Gemara says, "V'kachazina davdinan." What do you mean? We see people dancing and clapping. What do you mean? The Gemara, the Chacham don't say anything. So ulatamech. So what? I'll show you other examples where there's a halacha and people violate it, and no one says anything. We already had this. A person shouldn't sit at the opening of a lechi, opening of an alley into Rosh Hashanah where there's a lechi there, because he might drop something and it'll roll into Rosh Hashanah. people sit on a thing there, when they sit on the opening of an alley, nobody says anything to them. Ella, the reason we don't say anything is let the Jews not know the halacha, and if they're going to be a shogeg, they'll be a shogeg, rather than if they know the halacha, they'll violate it anyway. Now, svor minei ani mili b'drabbanan, about leaving people shogegim, perhaps, is only by halachas d'rabbanan, b'deraisa lo. But maybe if a person's violating a deraisa, we're supposed to tell them. Of course, it's v'lohi. Lo shna b'drabbanan, v'lo shna b'deraisa. It's no different. We keep him a shogeg. And the proof is that Yosefes Yom Kippurim. You're supposed to add to Yom Kippur fasting, both on the way in and on the way out, and that's doraisa. And people eat even after Ben Hashmoshe. People don't say anything to them. So it makes no difference whether it's rabbinic or doraisa. Rashi said, the Shulchan Aruch says, because they don't know the halacha, we don't have to stop them. Because maybe they'll continue doing it, they'll be mezidim. And that's even Isuri Doraisa. As long as the Isra is not Mefurish Min Torah, the whole issue of Tosefes Yom Kippur is learned as a drasha. It says, Me'erev ad Erev. You fast from Tisha. So there Chachamim learn that you have to have Tosefes. But it's not written Befeirush. So the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, anything written Befeirush, you do have to inform people, even if they're going to be mezidim. The Achronim also say that when it comes to an Isser, Minat Torah, where there's Kores, you also have to inform them as well. Even if it's not Befeirush. Back to the Gemara. The Mishnah said you could a housewife could loan a loaf of bread to her neighbor. B'Shabbat Aser. The only time we thought that it might be Aser, right? If you don't use the right language, like if you use Hilvani, that's B'Shabbat. Aval b'chol shaper dami. But based on that, it seems like if you did it on Wednesday, there's no problem, even using the word Hilvani. However, what about ribbis? The Gemara is going to be worried. Let's say the price of wheat right now is X. The price of wheat 2 weeks from now will be 2X. So the loaf of bread now costs $1. 2 weeks from now it's going to be $2. When you give her back the loaf of bread, so it's $2, you're violating what, gentlemen? Ribbis, right? Anytime you make, it's not ribbis, but not Torah. It's avak ribbis. It's rabbinic ribbis. To violate ribbis min Torah, you got to preset it in advance of the loan. You have to say, okay, when you pay me back, you got to pay me back 10% more. That's ribbis min Torah. But the Chachamim made a lot of cases that are ribbis. So this is called saw b'saw. When you would loan somebody a commodity of some type, there's a problem. When you give the commodity back, the price may be higher, and you could be violating ribbis. So the Gemara wants to say, our mission that seems to be allowing you to do this on a Wednesday must be Leva must be some like a Hillel. It's not if you're going to borrow a loaf of bread, you better set the price. This is worth $1. I'm going to give you $1 worth of bread when I give it back to you. But if you don't set the price, it's a problem because of ribbis. Ella yurku chitim v'nitzu bosa de ribbis, says Hillel. So our Mishnah, which seems to imply that you're allowed to do it, is not like Hillel. No, you could say that our Mishnah is also Hillel. So what's the stira? How do you resolve it? There were some areas that they fixed the price of bread. I remember in the 70s, when I visited Israel, Walter will remember, or anybody else who went then, everything was regulated. the price of, you went to the super soul, it was 90 agurot for a loaf of bread. Period. And the price of milk, right? The staples were tightly regulated by the state. They gave that, there was subsidies paid to Tnuv and everything. It was because they didn't want people to starve. So certain, and therefore there's other economies, other countries that do the same thing. They fix the price of bread or milk. So that was even in the time of Chazal. In an area where the price of bread is fixed, so you can borrow a loaf of bread, there's no problem with ribbis. But if bread wasn't tightly regulated, it could fluctuate in price based on availability of wheat and the harvest and all of that, and it was strictly a market economy, and the price could fluctuate. So then the Hillel had a problem with lending commodity for commodity. And the Shulchan Aruch says in your Deya, things that are not returned as like, when I give somebody a pitcher, he's going to give me the same pitcher back. But if I give somebody sugar or coffee or a loaf of bread, they're not going to give me the same thing back. They're going to eat it. They're going to give me something else back. So whenever you loan something that's a commodity that the item itself is not going to be returned, you're not allowed to loan somebody that. You only, except for money. Money, $100, you're going to give them back $100. But a different $100, but it's the value is set. But other things, the value is not set. So you're not allowed to loan it to him. And we're worried that maybe the price of the commodity will go up and you're over mishum ribbis. The only time you can do it is you have to estimate its price when they give it to you. And then, so if your neighbor loans you a cup of sugar, you should say, I think this is worth about $1. I'm going to give you $1 worth of sugar back when I give it back to you. That's how you have to, otherwise you can't borrow commodity without setting a price. Because unbeknownst to you, the price may change. However, so the tour already gave us a heter and said for things, small things, coffee, sugar, a loaf of bread, people are not makbid. And the fact that what's going to be the difference in price? From 69 cents to 79 cents, it's immaterial, and you can do it. And nobody's going to be makbid on that. And even without setting the price for these commodities, you're allowed to do it. And that seems to be the halach. And not only that, it says in your Deya, if there's a fixed market price, you go to Ralph's and the loaf of bread is $3. It's a standard price. It's a market price. Then of course you can do it. You can also, and the same thing for sugar and any commodity. So if there's a set price, it's also a permissibility to loan to your neighbor these items. Layla. Oh, you want to listen to the shir? Come listen to the shir. Okay. The Meno Mamino, the Mishnah said that if the person's not trustworthy, you can leave your cloak as a mashka. Grandpa. Itmar. Avas Yom Tov. So you make a loan on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Can you go to Bezdin to collect it? Rav Yosef or lo nitna li tova. It's not meant to collect in Bezdin. It's not in the jurisdiction of Bezdin. Now, the borrower has to return it, but the lender cannot force him to go to Beis Din to return it. It has to be. It's on a personal basis. Rabbi Amar Nitna Litova. Rabbi says no. You borrowed something from your neighbor like that, you still can take him to Beis Din to get him to pay you. Because if you're going to say it can go to Beis Din, if it's a fully legal jurisdictional thing, people are going to come write it down on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So that they removed it from the jurisdiction of the court so people would not write it. However, if a lender of an item would not know that he could go to court to get it back, so he's not going to lend it. And the Asi limanu b'simchas yontif. Therefore, his neighbor will be lacking a cup of sugar, and it's going to detract from his simchas yontif. So therefore, Rabbi says we placed it in the legal jurisdiction. So let's see from our Mishnah. Tanan, the Gemara wants to say, it said, Emeino mamino, maniach taliso etzlo. What was the whole point that you could leave your cloak as a mashkon with it? This seems to be a proof to say that it was not given to Beis Din. Because Mishumachi Mara Taliso Etzlo, they're keeping it personal. We're not talking about money now. Here's my coat, and we'll make the cheshbon after Shabbos. Comes back after Shabbos, we say, okay, it's worth. Meanwhile, you kept my coat. I'm taking my coat back, and I'm going to give you back whatever it is. So obviously, the arrangements were made in a way that it's not going to go to Beis Din. And so therefore, if this is a case, says Rav Yosef, that you could go to court, amay manet taliso etzlo. Well, you don't need a mashko. Litin, like give him what he needs, you lend it to him, and then nitva, then you take him to court later on, and you get it from him. What's all mashkin? The mashkin seems to prove the case that it doesn't have legal jurisdiction. You just have to treat it personally. No, because no raya. The guy still can claim, even the one who says nitna litova, that has legal jurisdiction, but he doesn't necessarily want to go to court. Leave me the mashkon, because that way you go. If we have a dispute later on, we'll go to Beis Din. But he wants to avoid going to Beis Din. Leaving the mashkon avoids going to Beis Din. But you have the ability to go to Beis Din if you want, says Rav or Rabbah. Says Shulchan Aruch, Havos Yontov Kishar Vosi. If you lend something on Yontov, it's like any other loan. The Nitna Litova Gam Beis Din. You can go to Beis Din and collect. The halacha is like Rabbah. Let's see. We're not finished the sugya. We'll see. I think the Gemara ends up supporting Rabbah, which is why the halacha eventually is like Rabbah. This is a case where a whole bunch of people bought a cow together, like in partnership. One of them was going to shecht it and distribute the pieces to the other people. It's like a loan, in a sense. Now, remember, Rosh Hashanah is the first day of Tishri. So Elul is either a 29-day month, and the 30th day is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, which is normally Elul is a 29-day month. Now we've set the calendar, but in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, it was done by Eidim. So it could be, if the Eidim don't show up, that Elul could be a full month, 30-day, and then Rosh Hashanah is the next day. So every year, the 30th day of Elul, they actually treated like Rosh Hashanah. because they assumed that the Eidim would come and say, oh, we saw the moon last night. But if Eidim didn't show up, that's why Rosh Hashanah is completely different than all other 2-day yontifs. Because in Eretz Yisrael itself, where they were Makadesh through Re'iyah, they many times ended up keeping 2 days yontif. Because they kept the first day, hoping that it was Rosh Hashanah. But if the Eidim didn't show up, they would declare, really it was a Yom Chol, they would declare the next day. But they davened Rosh Hashanah, they gave korbanos like Rosh Hashanah, and the next day was real Rosh Hashanah. If the Eidim did show up early in the day, they would say, oh yeah, last night Elul was finished, and today is the first day of Rosh Hashanah. And they continued doing 2 days of Rosh Hashanah once they set the calendar. But you see, the reason why we have 2 days Pesach, 2 days was different. That's because if you lived in Bavel, by the time the Eidim made the trip from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, they might not get the word. And then when they were doing the fire, the Shomronim, because they would light a fire to send a message, but then the Shomronim would ruin it and light a fire even when it wasn't Rosh Chodesh. So the 2 days Yontif, which is why on Rosh Hashanah the laws are completely different. We say technically we should say Shechianu only on the first day. Normally we say Shechianu for Kiddush for both days, because each day could be today's Yontif. Rosh Hashanah is not like that. That's why on the second day of Rosh Hashanah we wear a new suit, that the Shechianu should go on the new suit, because it might not necessarily go on the Yontif, because there's a suffix, maybe it's a Yuma Arichta, it's one long day, and the Shechianu, we say the first night of Rosh Hashanah covers both days. So what does this have to do with us? So we're talking about a year that was Shemitah, and then the Rosh Hashanah is the Rosh Hashanah after Shemitah. So if Elul was going to be a Moleh, so really this 30th day, and he distributed it on this 30th day, which was the first day of Rosh Hashanah, but it turned out that the Eidim didn't show up. So really this is still Elul. All loans in a Shemitah are wiped away the last day of Shemitah. So this is the last day of Shemitah, so this guy doesn't have to distribute the meats. So if you say Chodesh Mubir Mishameh, V'im Lav, now if Elul was a 29-day month, because the Eidim showed up, so this is not Rosh Hashanah, and he distributed on Rosh Hashanah. The next year, doesn't do with Shemitah, Eidim Shabbat. However, what does this have to do with us? The Ilo Nitnali Tova. But if this is not a loan that can go to Bezdin, my Mishameh, the only kind of loan that Shemitah undoes is a loan that's Nizkak LeBezdin. So the Rava wants to bring a proof that Ein Chanami, even a loan on Yontif, is a loan that can go to Bezdin. The Gemara says no proof. Shiny Hasam, the Gloy Mills of the Cholu. In this case, when the Chodesh was Ma'uber, when the Elul's 30th day was Elul, so it wasn't Yontif. So there's no problem with making loans. So you could make a loan on it wasn't Yontif where there's a prohibition of making a loan. So Toshma mi Seifa. Well, let's look at the Seifa of that Mishnah. In Lav, we said if the Eidim came and Elul was a 29-day month, and this is Rosh Hashanah, Eidim Mishameh. But still the same proof. If you're going to tell me that this is a kind of loan on Yontif, and this is really Yontif, when Elul is a 29-day month, and the Eidim came, and this is the first day of Rosh Hashanah, that it says Eidim Mishameh, but that must be the loan, or this deal that he made with the people that he was shechting for, could have gone to Bezdin. If it's not a legal jurisdiction case, it should have been Mishameh. So more says the Iyov le Shakel. Listen, because if he wants to return the loan, he's allowed to take it. Mishameh means somebody wants to pay you back. You have to say, no, I'm going to wipe it away. So, but here he's allowed to take it, implying in Reisha, Iyoiv leilosha. Are you telling me that if the guy wanted to return it, he could not take it? So the Gemara says, yeah, Reisha tzarach lamemer lemeshamit. Since the first case, this could be the last day of the Shemitah year. If somebody wants to return the item to him, he has to say, I refuse to accept. Now, if the guy says, I understand it's Shemitah, but I still want to pay you, he's allowed to accept afterward, but he has to say Meshamit. Seifa lo tzarach lamemer meshamit. The Seifa case where it was not Shemitah anymore, and the guy wants to come and return it to you, you don't have to say Meshamit because it's not Shemitah. You can accept it completely. As we learned in the Mishnah, Kedisnan, Hamachzer chov b'shvis. Let's say you owe somebody money, and you're the kind of person you always want to return a loan. You don't want to be obligated to anybody. And I don't care, Shemitah, yes Shemitah, no Shemitah. I want to return my loan. Are you allowed to accept it? So the Gemara says you are. The lenders should say, Yomer lo mishamitan. The lender should say, I am wiping away your loan. Now, if the guy who borrowed says, even so I want to pay you, yikabel mimenu. The din is you're allowed to be makabel. From a pasuk. Rav Avi shakul mashkona. Rav Avi he would keep the mashkon. He wouldn't, that's a way, he didn't want to just take the loan, but he would just keep the mashkon. And Rabbi Bar Ula Mari Mirumi, he would do a trick. He would sort of borrow, he wouldn't do it he wouldn't call it a collateral. He would do a trick. He would take something from him. He would keep it. These Chacham didn't want to just take the money if somebody wants to pay you back. They got it back in a different way, not straight cash. The Chen Erev Pesach, we brought a proof on Erev Pesach. You could buy a sheep and leave over your coat. On Rav Yochanan, Magdish Adam Pischo b'Shabbos v'Giso b'Yontif. Let's say a person arrives to Yerushalayim right before Shabbos, and that year Erev Pesach is Shabbos, and he can be magd, and he hasn't been magdish his sheep to say Harezu Pesach. He can magdish it on Shabbos. Normally, you can't make transactions, but here you could be magdish your Pesach on Shabbos and your Korban Chagiga on Yom Tov. Name a Messiah lay. Let our Mishnah be a support. We saw you could buy the Korban Pesach. This seems to be a riot that if you had not purchased and magdish your Korban Pesach, you can do it on Yom Tov and Shabbos itself. Or says that's no proof. There were other people subscribed to this Korban Pesach, not just him. And someone had been magdish it before, so there's no riot. He was appointed to this group, and the Mikar Mekadesh Mekoi. This is already, there's no riot from here because it could have been Mekadesh from Erev Shabbos. But it's implied that he had just gotten subscribed today, and there's a halacha that you're not allowed to be subscribed on Yom Tov. So Mor says, but this is a different case. Shani Achakiv and the Rogeletzlo. This is a guy who subscribed every year for the last 20 years. So if he appoints you this on Shabbos, you can accept it because you're in the group. Keman di imni ba mi karadon. It's like a foursome in a golf at a golf club. It's a group; they're always together, even if they didn't appoint. They're assumed that they're going to. So same thing here. The people who subscribe year after year to the Korban Pesach, they're assumed they're part of the group. a person could go to his local shepherd, who he normally buys sheep from. The noiten lo tlele pischo magdisho v'yotzebo. He can give him the sheep, and he can be magdish it. And this must be also, we're talking about Shabbos and Yom Tiv. So Hasanani, even the regular, it's like Dushale Meikara. This shepherd knew he was coming. He's come every year for 50 years. He was already magdish it from before. He wasn't magdish tani. Magdish, the Brisa says he was magdish at the Chatchila. It says Hegdish Ilui midrabanon. That means he did the Hagdasha was done already. This is an extra. It's a Tosefet Hagdasha that like you made Kiddush already in Shul Friday night. Chachamim said when you come home you got to make Kiddush ala kos. It's a separate Kiddush. So the Chachamim say as well, even though it was already Magdish, they want the owner to be Magdish as well. So it's not it's only a Hegdish Ilui midrabanon. Okay, so, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Magdish Adam Pischo B'Shabbat. Freit the Gemara mi Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say, Rabbi Yochanan, Allah Kistam Mishnah? We know Rabbi Yochanan teaches us that Locha is like an anonymous Mishnah. Utanan. And we have a Mishnah in Erchi, Lo Magdishin, Lo Marichin, Lo Machmimin, Lo Magbin, Chumas Umaisris. You cannot be Magdish on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You cannot be Marich. You cannot make an Erech vow. You can't give all your assets to the Beis Hamikdash. You can't elevate Trumas and Maestros. Kol elu b'yontifam rukavachoyim b'Shabbos. How can Rav Yochanan says Magdish on Pischo b'Shabbos when he says halachas like that Mishnah that you're not allowed? Says the Gemara lo kasha kan b'choyvish kabulem zman. When Rav Yochanan permits, you're talking about a korban that you got to do a certain day, and if you didn't do it, you miss it. So Yud Daled Nisan, you got to offer the korban base. If you did on this, you didn't before. Rav Yochanan allows you in that situation to be magdish the animal to be the korban pesach, because otherwise you're going to miss out. For example, a korban chatas, I can bring it whenever I want. A korban shlomim, korban toida, korban, a neder v'nedova. They're not tied to time. Such a korban I can't be magdish on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay, we are going to stop here. And we'll learn the Mishnah tomorrow night. We'll learn tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. I wish everybody a nice Shabbos.
Shabbos Nachamu.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.